Hello. Yeah, getting music.
That's
Still
actually a
says
better
off
start.
there.
It should have appeared now. That's still a better start than my radio show had last night. I spoke into the wrong microphone and spent a good 30 seconds trying to turn off the full version of Rick Wakeman's Arthur, which just carried on playing and really revealed quite how weird and 70s it is. Is this the really bad 2001 music?
Yes.
That's a really Rome thing to do. That's such a Rome thing to do.
Oh dear. That brings back bad memories.
Oh, dear.
There's something wrong with his eye.
There's something wrong with the theme. There is something wrong with the theme. There is something wrong with the theme.
Yes,
Well,
quite.
2001 was the most supremely boring election I've ever seen. So,
Yes,
yeah.
it was also the first one I saw. So.
Actually, 2010 was my first all-night election, funnily enough. I was away from home on 2005. It was an election. Right, good evening, everybody.
Good evening. Hello, good evening, and welcome. To all of those of you out there in alternatehistory.com land, hello, welcome to this, our second and final Politibrit debate/discussion about the forthcoming British general election. So far, the only one scheduled to take place in 2015, but for all we know, Nicola Sturgeon will be Prime Minister in about 6 months and will probably be at war with Belgium. But if you are just joining us, hello. We will do our level best to make this as informative and as non-bantery as possible, but a couple of memes will no doubt slip in at some point. So, for those of you who are not who may be unfamiliar with our questions, I'd like to introduce us to everyone. My name is Jack. My name is Jack Lord Rowan, as I go about on the board, and I'm a Labour activist speaking to you now from the incredible seat of Bermondsey and Old Southwark. Tom.
Which one?
Yes, which one?
The black one.
Well, I mean, we're talking about AH.com here. We're all white. Okay, hello. My name is Tom, as we just discovered. My name is Tom Black. I am also a Labour member. I'm not sure I would grandly call myself an activist, given what I've been up to in this campaign, but I've certainly been a foot soldier. I have been. I'm called Meadow on the forum. I recently changed my long-standing user title to personality-based drama, thanks to the other Tom, fanned for that. And I live in Croydon South, a very, very safe Conservative constituency, which happens to just be to the south of Croydon Central, one of the constituencies in which this election is very likely to be won or lost. Delete as appropriate, or indeed, as we've now decided, as both parties are going to lose, it's whether the election will be lost or lost.
Ian?
I'm Ian Bowen, otherwise known as a forum Ian Bowen. I'm a Liberal Democrat activist, and I'm broadcasting you from the marginal seat of Birmingham Yardley, where things are a bit odd this time.
Oh.
Oh. Mr. Dr. Anderson.
Hello, yes, I'm Tom Anderson, fanned on the forum. My particular interest in the election is psephology, and tonight we will be discussing the most unexpected and chaotic election for generations, and we might even get onto the British one as well at some point.
Hey.
Alberta.
Yeah, shout out there for the Albertans.
Albertans, that's for you.
Yes, and I should say that I'm in Doncaster Central, which was a safe Labour seat, but judging by the fact that the MP has been directly canvassing us and begging for our votes, and we've got a pile of literature this high, I wonder if it is anymore.
Fantastic. And last but certainly not least, Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Cook, Andy C on the forum. I'm especially interested in anything to do with analysing data such as polls and any excuse for firing up a spreadsheet which I can make more complicated than at all necessary. And I'm just here to be a pedant, I think.
A pedant who can theoretically kill the man.
Great, well, fantastic, and thank you all so much for taking your time out to join us on a bank holiday Monday, especially to those of you with families / small children, or indeed any children.
You know, there's only one person watching, by the way.
Yes, for the yeah. Oh right.
But you know, that's fine. It'll pick up,
Still
and this thing gets recorded and stuck on YouTube.
Well, okay. Well, in that case, the following members of the board aren't actually gay. No.
It's a very good reference, and a very good subversion of the reference.
Thank you very much.
The result just come in from the board, from Error Watch. We have a swing to the Conservatives. Alex Richards has made up his mind, and he has chosen to go very reluctantly to go blue.
I see. Yes, that's well, that's
the first result of the night. And if we put it into our swingometer, just a bit of fun.
If replicated across the country,
percent swing to the Conservatives, and a majority of 631.
Yes, fantastic. Now that's what the opinion polls are saying. Now ICM is saying 600 vote margin, seat margin for the Conservatives. Ipsos is saying a 595 one. YouGov are saying 590. We on the hand that we're being a little bit limited. We're reducing that. We're saying an overall majority of 6. But that's still all to play for. And even though people have not thought I've said any numbers so far, I'm hearing 3. Right. So I thought it would be quite good just to run through what I thought would probably be the best thing to do in terms of what we might say a mock sort of setup of what our discussions here will be. If anyone else thinks I've left anything out that's important, do let me know. I think we should probably start off by talking about the state campaign so far. Moving on to what the latest polls have been saying, particularly, of course, that ICM poll, which has literally just come in from Sheffield Hallam, which probably means that we're all a lot more in tune than the newspapers are, but there we go. I think maybe talking about some of the manifesto launches. I have one of them here. This has literally been the only one I've been able to find, and this was only because I stole it out of the Enfield North constituency office when no one was looking. Obviously, we still have to talk about Scotland. There's no getting around that.
19.
we need to talk about Scotland. I mean, where is Paul? And we can talk about the 19, but I just want to know where Paul is, really.
The 19, and I think obviously then the only thing to do, given the fact there are 2 days of campaigning left, because obviously you don't campaign on an election day, we'll probably be talking on to our predictions for what's going on, as well as the state of the local race near us. As I was saying, if you are just joining us, I do have this ocean of literature, because given the fact that I come from, donkey and red rosette territory, I don't know what it's like to actually have a campaign around me before. So we can probably start. If anyone does have some literature they would like to talk about, we can do that. But in the meantime,
sorry, Rome, Jack. Can I just interrupt for a second? If you remember that Aries, the Swedish fellow, was asking if he could sit in this time, and he's just reminded me no one has PM'd him the link. So does anyone have any objection to him sitting in this time?
I certainly would not have any objection to that. It would be nice to get an enlightened foreigner with us.
Quite so. I'll deal with that while you
if you get the link from Fiddle, it's in the Facebook message, so you can.
I'll do that.
I'm hearing that we are getting a massive win from Stockholm Central, so we're good to hear.
Absolutely. And in fact, this will actually be the largest ever result for the Social Democrats in this country.
Much to Ian's annoyance.
John Cartwright, whoever he may be, will be very pleased indeed.
Which John Cartwright?
Well, indeed, I think they're one and the same when it comes to the SDP.
Well, as I've said, I think, and I will just freewheel this very slightly, because as all of you will remember, we did our last Google Hangout about a month ago when the debate was effectively just starting. So what's happened since then has, this has been an incredibly long election campaign by British standards. On average, they usually last about 4 weeks.
You don't remember 1997?
Yes, exactly. As I was saying, on average, they usually last about 4 weeks. This one has lasted 6, which, as Ian points out, I think is is the same, give or take a day, from the 1997 result, which basically left with Labour being very far ahead in the polls and ended with Labour being very far ahead in the polls. From a polling point of view, it has been remarkably static. We saw a slight, a very marginal upswing maybe in the two-party share between Labour and the Conservatives, and a slight decline, relatively speaking, everyone houses, but again, maybe a percentage point one way or the other. We've had an election campaign that has been very sadly, until yesterday was, free of any sort of major "what the fuck is going on" moments. But then, thankfully, Miliband, who had been having a very good campaign up until that point, decided that he was actually going to lead the Labour Party into the promised land and unveiled his massive set of tablets. Owing to deflation, of course, that had actually been reduced by 40% in total. Aside that, there haven't really been any tremendous gaffes whatsoever. It's been rather dull and plodding, and given the fact that I'm now quite bored of the whole thing, God only knows what the average, Joe Blogs, the man in the street.
The election has been very, very boring, as you say, much more so because we knew that we expected there to be very exciting. I mean, I made quite a glib remark on the forum, heaven knows whenever I've ever done that, but a few nights ago, just saying, does anyone else remember when this election was all about UKIP? And I was actually making quite a serious point, because there was a period as late as a few months ago. Yes. Good evening, Max. As late as a few months ago, people were saying, well, we are about to see four-party politics. We're maybe going to see fifth. It was ridiculous. And now here we are, because it didn't feel ridiculous. And now here we are, and things did actually default back to effectively two-party politics, with others sort of getting involved in certain ways. And to be honest, the last 3 days... but even when you consider the way the national media is portraying, you're absolutely right, Ian, but with the SNP, it's always in relation to how they will do it. They'll keep Cameron out, but they'll tack on to Miliband, but they'll also actually be pulling his strings, etc., etc. Not that we need an image of Ed Miliband having his strings pulled, but I think the biggest disappointment has been the kind of the lack of actual policy discussion. I think myself, I was very much in the let's not have debates because they dominate everything camp, and while I didn't quite get my wish, I was explaining to someone actually just earlier today that actually I was very happy with the debate program and the various non-debates that also occurred, because they were a kind of set of tailor-made broadcasts specific to this election, which I think is a good precedent to set, rather than a kind of rigid structure that a lot of people wanted, where we kind of have to have presidential-style things. It has to be 3 of them, has to be a fixed number of leaders at all of them. Really
and again, what I think we may be arguing in a couple of elections' time is that the precedent was actually set with the leaders' question time event, which I think took place in 2005.
The very first one was 2001. They had 3 separate leaders' question times in 2001, and then they did a joint one very similar to the one the other night in 2005. You're right. So right. I agree with you. But I've actually made that point myself. I completely agree. So, but anyway, I was getting on a bit of a tangent there. The main point is that while this election hasn't been completely dominated by the debates, which is great news, as was pointed out to me on the forum the other day, it also hasn't really been dominated by policy either. It's been really the last basically 10 days have been day in, day out. Will Ed Miliband go with the Scots? Will David Cameron be able to do anything because of the Scots? And will he have to go in with the DUP, etc., etc.? But generally the focus is on not the DUP and the potential problems they have with it being in a functioning liberal Western society and propping up a government thereof, but more on Nicola Sturgeon being literally Hitler. So anyway, that's kind of been my disappointment with this campaign, and I give the floor.
Well, I think that what's happened is we've seen the election turn into a negative contest of people ruling things out. Yeah, nobody is. Well, the 2 main parties, outside the 2 main parties, nobody's been putting forward any sort of positive vision whatsoever. It's become a, we won't do this, we won't do that. I've never seen a situation where people are tying their hands so much. But as far as I can tell, it's that if the polls are correct, and to be perfectly honest, they haven't moved much, if anything, over the course of the campaign, there's no reason to think that whilst in general the polls aren't correct, then we're ending up a situation where I don't think anybody will be able to form a government, and we'll be back here again in 3 bloody months, sitting here going, well, this is the second election. And actually, the answer is the same again. It's been
And what happens then? Yeah.
It's not been negative. It's just been a situation of, well, I'm not going to do this. It's not we will do this. It's I'm not going to do this. I won't do this. We won't do this with them. It's like the amount of options people have restricted is quite terrifying, really. Both, on Conservative and Labour sides. Well, the smaller parties have actually tried to put through different things, but as you say, in Scotland, it's all been a case of, SNP literally Hitler. One or two of them maybe, but in general not. Well, the scenes from Glasgow weren't very enticing, and the amount of stalking of Margaret Curran that's going on is well out of order. I don't like Margaret Curran. I think she's a vile woman, but what's been happening is out of order for civilised.
It's somewhat frightening, I think.
It's somewhat reminiscent of 1930s Germany, and I know that's a direct call to arms, but I'm afraid it is reminiscent of that sort of politics. And I appreciate it's not the SNP doing it, although it is people who support the SNP who do it.
Does everyone remember when the SNP were going to collapse immediately after the referendum?
But simply, I remember that, and it hasn't happened. And we're in this situation where we've had an incredibly negative election. I was sitting here roughly this time last week going, can we have it today? Because it's bloody over with. Had enough. No more fucking leaflets. And I'm sure the general public must think that even more. People, when I spoke to them on the doorsteps in February and March, were looking forward to the election. They saw a choice. They appear to become more disinterested. I fear for the turnout. Now, okay, we're on third pass canvassing, which is always a bit tricky because you're getting down to people who actually really don't want to answer the door. But I'm getting the feeling out there that we're looking at possibly a low turnout, except for in Scotland, and we're looking to hung Parliament, and I think it's all going to be a bit shit, to be honest. However, I'm sure that we'll have some entertaining results on the night.
I'm sure we will, and that's what we all look forward to. Tom, Mr. Anderson, Dr. Anderson.
Yes, well, to tie in with what Ian said, and also something that Andy posted earlier on the forum, I think to a certain extent, although it is a cliche, this is a good election to lose, in that the largest, the one of the two major parties which is not in government after this will presumably have the opportunity to be the one that is able to sell itself as everyone conspired against us, give us a majority. And I think to an extent that is what drove Labour's poll numbers up in late 2010, early 2011. And there is the possibility this time, obviously, that the government may not last anyway like as long, although Tom will remind us that a lot of people said the same in 2010. So, yes, that's the point.
Another one of our Does Anyone Remember gags is, does anyone remember when the coalition was going to end in 2012, then 2013, then the end of 2014?
Yeah.
And it was going to break up in January, it was going to break up in March, and it didn't. And,
No.
Of course. And,
I think all along it will last.
Could last till 2020 at this rate.
And yes, Andy.
Well, I think there's a lot to all of what's been said. I'm a complete amateur when it comes to the campaigning side of things, but what it has felt like to me is everyone is terrified of losing. Everyone is aware that they're very close to losing, that everyone is about to lose, and they don't want to lose, and they're also aware of that, so they want to be more active and trying to win, but they can't actually work out the best way of doing it. So no one really knows how to break through. Everyone is trapped. As Ian said, it looks like the polls have been static. I did an analysis the other day, and everything is completely consonant with absolutely no change since the dissolution of Parliament. All of the movement we've seen has been wiggling around for each company around a baseline that hasn't moved, that hasn't shifted. And that baseline is ranging from 2-point lead to Labour with panel base and populist, although that last, it has suffered a methodological shift recently, to a 4-point lead for the Tories with ICM, and 3 points with Ashcroft. So it's somewhere in between -2 and +4. It has stayed there, unless there's a late swing, unless the undecideds break for someone at the last day. We're going to have the world's most heavily hung parliament since the 1920s.
And of course, famously, what did happen in the 1920s was a situation where the first-ranked party didn't end up forming the government, and it was the second-largest party propped up by the third-largest party, despite the fact that both of those were still considerably further behind in the overall seating than the Conservatives. That was the first Labour government, James Rice MacDonald's government, which only came to power following a failure of the Conservatives under Mr Baldwin to get the Queen's speech through.
And there's absolutely no risk of that happening again ever, is there?
No.
And that particular government, as I seem to recall, although I wasn't there at the time, was eventually brought badly down by the press, the Daily Mail.
It was indeed, yes. There are some interesting comparisons to draw here, aren't there?
Mm.
Do you think?
The press
Do you
are
think
much more fascinated with royal babies at the moment?
that's true? But I do think that Miliband will have to resign in September over the Maduro letter.
Yeah.
Well, one point we can make is that presumably the people nowadays are not quite so gullible as to fall for the Zinoviev letter, he said, laughing hollowly, because,
That's a bit of
presumably, yes, not all journalism is dependent on print journalism anymore, and in fact, if I look at my You Can Search the Net book from 1995, I can tell you that the British Labour Party's website, Mr Tony Blair, spells out his policies at www.poptel.org.uk/labour-party. So, yeah.
Is that a book of websites?
It is, yes. It's a website directory from 95.
Fantastic.
Yes.
I'm very reminded.
Such things did exist, yes.
Of course,
That is
in typical-
superb.
Of course, in typical fan fashion, what will actually happen is that I don't know, Vladimir, like Xi Jinping, will sort of do a supportive SMS to Ed Miliband about like us getting rid of Trident, and someone will tweet a picture of it, and at which point Band explodes, and we have to have 17 by-elections in the Doncaster area.
Quite possible.
Yeah.
Which will take away the last vestiges of any kind of Labour cobbled together majority.
And I think at this point we should introduce our first ever international panel member, Max, I believe, who has just joined us, who I presume would be interested in maybe giving us a little bit of the view from Sweden. Max, would you like to give us a little bit of the...
There is a view from Sweden, yeah. I don't think... am I coming through all right?
Yes?
Yes, yeah, great.
I don't think there's really been much discussion of it here. But it's interesting because the mood you get from this group, at least, reminds me a lot of what you got after the last election here, where you have like absolutely no one is winning, everyone is losing, and it's the question of who gets to lose the least. Except that somehow here it happened like 4 weeks before the election, and I'm not sure how that came to be.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the time it took for people to realise something had happened, because Andy mentioned that there's been, it is theoretical, you know, it's ultimately all theoretical, and we'll find out on the day, etc., but it does look like there's been no movement and thus no change in public opinion since the Parliament was dissolved. And one theory that actually came to mind for me just today, and I'd like to put it to you guys, is that it does link to this whole idea of how there's been such little swap over of voters since 2010 between the two big parties.
Yes.
What if we are actually, and of course Labour have recovered. They've recovered a lot of people. They've won back a lot of, for example, people who went to, you know, the people that Ian calls never really Lib Dems, the people who went over Iraq and came back once the coalition was formed. And Labour have kind of got up to somewhere, and the Tories have kind of gone they've gone down a little bit, but they're also somewhere, and they've lost a bit to UKIP. That's probably undeniable at this point. But what if we are actually going into this election, and the reason there is such little movement is that both parties are now at their just core base? We've got a rare situation where both parties have got their base mobilised and interested, but neither of them are really reaching anybody else.
It's an interesting point, and I think, was it Andy who mentioned that if you take the polls at face value, both major parties are now drawing the kind of popular support that John Major did in 1997, which you know is an unprecedented situation certainly in the post-war world.
Yeah, I think I mentioned that whoever wins will have a lower proportion of the electorate voting for them than anyone since before the Second World War, or possibly before the First. And we didn't even have women voting at that point.
No.
We're looking at less than a fifth of the electorate, if the polls are right, will have plumped for the winning party, unless there's a really decent boost in turnout.
And I think I mean, there were 14 million plus people who voted for John Major, which does remain a record back in 1992. Both parties combined might struggle to reach 13.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not sure if I quite share the view that this is going to be a low turnout election. I think there might be a tendency for us to confuse apathy with what is currently going on. You know, sort of a lot of people just sort of not refusing to open doors for canvassers just because they're fed up of the whole thing. I'm not sure that that necessarily correlates to a lack of actual interest in voting on the day, or an interest in what the result is going to be. Lots of people, I think, may have already made up their minds or thought that they've made up their minds. But I did sort of say, one thing that I've seen in quite a lot of the sort of polling breakdowns is that actual certainty to vote amongst voters is in the high 80s amongst all the major political parties. Overall certainty to vote is still high amongst undecided voters. And I think it's actually higher than it's definitely higher than it was in 2005. I believe it's higher than it was in 2010 as well. Now, whether or not that does mean that we are going to have an overall increase in turnout from 2010, I'm not sure. But I do think we're going to be thinking about turnout in the high 60s rather than the low 60s. But that's just a gut feeling from what I've seen on the polling in the ground, and of course it does mean that we end up with, you know, parting like it's 1999, and it turns out that, you know, fewer people are interested in the MP for Barnsley West is than, you know, who wants to be police and crime commissioner.
Yeah.
But that's probably
Well, I sort of half agree and half disagree in that I wonder how the undecideds are going to break. There still appear to be a lot of undecideds out there. A lot of polls have said 15, 16, 17, even 19% of people are still undecided. And that's not counting people who might change their vote, which is a completely different thing.
Yeah.
And when it comes down to it, as I say, those undecideds are trying to make up their mind in a very sterile environment. Where nobody's really saying anything positive. Everybody's saying, we're not going to do this, we're not going to do that, we won't work with them, we won't, you know. I'm really wondering, I'm waiting for Red Miliband to turn and say, we won't work with Liberals. Because that'll finish it, because then it'll be, I can understand the way earlier on in the campaign it might be deployed to say you must give a Labour majority. But it must be bloody obvious to the Malcolm Tuckers of this world there is not going to be a Labour majority. There is not going to be a Conservative majority. And I wonder if the undecideds, in this negative, sterile atmosphere, will sit back and say, fuck it, we're staying at home. I expect Scotland to be high, particularly in seats where the unionist coupon is being played slightly. And that may push the turnout back up, but I honestly expect it to be mid-60s. And I suspect that there'll be seats. We're not going to see a Liverpool Riverside, what was it, 34%, something like that in 2001? We're not going to see that again, but we will see a substantial number of inner-city seats with turnouts in the 40s, possibly even into the 30s.
Yeah, I know it was a November, but I think the turnout in Manchester Central by-election back in 2012 was is the second lowest in British history. I think it was only low. The only one that was
That
lower
was a by-election, wasn't it?
post-war history, rather. I think that the only one that was lower than that, I think, was Leeds Central back in 1999, where Hilary Benn won.
I think it's actually the other way around, Jack. Leeds
right.
is second lowest, Manchester Central is lowest.
But Manchester might be, yeah. But,
well, I don't know much about turnout figures. I sound like a folksy Republican candidate in the primaries. I don't know much about turnout figures, but or indeed, the mid 60s, late 60s, and so on. But what I do know is that this election is going to deliver certainly a late 1970s Parliament.
Yes.
Yes.
There we go. Segue.
Yeah, which of course is the high turnout, which of course is, the previous high point of Scottish nationalism.
Yes.
They were grand total of 11 seats. Frankly, if the S&P
And they'll get 8 more this time.
Yeah, they will. They'll be getting,
the 11 seats this time, I imagine that, Alex Salmond will literally explode. And I think probably that does give us a segue into talking briefly about Scotland. I mean, I think what has actually been quite interesting is that not a massive amount has changed in Scotland since the last time we talked about it.
Yes. Not much has changed in the whole country.
Exactly. Just by way of a little bit of context, so what has traditionally been a Labour fiefdom, Labour, of course, dominating, typically getting 2/3 as an absolute minimum of the Scottish seats, has now transferred into a position where, since the referendum, the SNP have become the party predominantly of those who voted yes in the referendum, so those voters who supported independence, in addition to their previous constituency, who weren't necessarily people who wanted to have independence but were supportive of the Scottish National Party in their traditional heartlands. And we are now in a position where, frankly, if Labour had 10 seats at the general election, that will be a massive relief to quite a lot of people in the party. There was a poll that came out earlier this week that suggested that there is a possibility of the SNP doing a clean sweep, winning every single one of the 59 seats available in Scotland.
That's impossible, because 59 is significantly more than 19.
Yeah.
Yes.
Depends what base you're counting in.
I actually made that joke in the timeline, I remember. Well,
Babylonian Peter Snow, who is at his sundial.
Yes. If I could just make one comment about the Scottish polls. I mean, up to this point, I've never been quite convinced that the SNP could be as high as the polls have been saying. I can easily believe they'll come top in terms of votes, maybe even come top in numbers of seats, but not to that level of wipeout. And up to this point, I've thought, well, I can't really justify that from gut feeling, considering that all the polls have said, or virtually all the polls have said that. But if we look back at Sheffield Hallam, I've disbelieved all the polls on that up to today, and we've finally had one that actually bears some semblance to what I know the constituency is like in reality.
Yes.
So who knows, really?
Yeah.
Yes, and I think obviously Sheffield Hallam, of course, which RCM has come out. So this was, according to a lot of polls, including constituencies-specific polls, but where crucially they did not mention the candidate. Was the suggestion that Sheffield Hallam was on a knife edge. So with the Liberals being behind, so the Deputy Prime Minister Nick Clegg, Liberal Democrats, being behind by up to 5 points, and we've now seen that he's actually ahead, according to ICM, by I think 12 or so. And Tom, you very correctly point out, Sheffield Hallam is notable in the fact that it is the only seat in South Yorkshire that has never been held by the Labour Party. It is also a very rural seat, a very affluent seat, and a seat
it's the richest seat in England that is not in the south.
Quite right. You go there, there's Waitroses everywhere. It's
Yeah, that's sort of like a sort of gentrification Tebbit test, isn't it?
Yeah.
Whether they get their shopping.
But of course, I'm sure we can probably talk about Hallam later. Apologies for the diversion. So I don't know what the rest of you think. I mean, Andy, would you say that there's a sign in there that maybe when a constituency MP is named, it actually makes them more popular if they're good? Of course, this is Scottish Labour we're talking about, where, frankly, I'm speaking as a Labour man myself, most of our MPs in Scotland are abysmal.
Yeah, there has been a lot of there has been some research on incumbency bonuses and incumbency effects, and it's usually worth a point or two to Labour or Conservatives, and 8 to 15 points to the Lib Dems. However, the second Ashcroft picture, the second Ashcroft poll, should have picked out most of that. The question is how much of what remains is up to the naming. I don't know that amount. Apparently, without the incumbency effects, Cameron would have got enough to go with the minority, about 315 last time. Has the incumbency, but incumbency effects can wear off. And there's only a certain amount that incumbency effects can resist the tide. 1997 was the only election where the Tories had not only no incumbency effect but a negative one.
Yeah,
they've been taking it for granted. Will it go? Will it go backwards? All we can say is it adds a lot more to the chaos effects. I've modelled the Lib Dem seats on my model with and without an extra boost to incumbency, and it makes a big difference in both directions. For the Tories and Labour, less so, because if you're taking that extra boost of incumbency out of the picture, then any seats that the Tories lose to Labour, they pick up from the Lib Dems.
Yeah.
A Lib Dem collapse preferentially benefits Cameron's party.
Yeah.
It's about even for the first 5 or 6 seats each. Then it goes to 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 4 to 1 in favour of the Tories once the Lib Dems get pushed down past 30 seats or so. If you go up to Scotland and outside of the incumbency effect, when you run the models on that, there is a very, very steep curve between the SNP getting about 5 points ahead of Labour to the SNP being 20 points ahead. It flattens off at both sides. They're currently, according to the polls, 30-something ahead. They might just be, but if that's uncertain and they're only 20 ahead, a bit of a push could have massive changes. For every extra point they snatch back, they might snatch back 2 constituencies.
Yes.
I'm afraid they have got to go a long way down to get to 19. But I also would say, slightly towards Than's point, although I do believe there has been a massive sea change in Scotland, I don't really believe the most recent polls. I think there's a shy unionist effect at work.
Because, of course, there was a shy unionist effect to an extent with the referendum poll. I mean, like the...
And that shy unionist effect would, my reasoning is, be concentrated in Labour. Because once you're north of the border, if you're voting Tory now, still telling the pollsters you're voting Tory, you're not shy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The rock bottom levels of Lib Dem support they're not finding the shy people anymore.
No.
If they're voting Lib Dem, they're saying it. So it's in Labour that the shy unionists will be concentrated. And that's where a 5-point switch.
I'm not.
Yes, Ian. Yes, I was going to come in with a friend of mine's been up in Aberdeenshire quite extensively, but I think probably your evidence is probably better than mine.
Oh, well, it's probably about as good. Remember, I see English party data, not Scottish or Welsh party data, but I do have friends in Aberdeenshire. I believe that there's going to be a lot of nose holding going on, certainly in the northeast. My understanding is that a lot of people from all parties are determined at virtually whatever cost to get Salmond. I don't think it'll happen. I think if Malcolm Bruce was standing again, it might happen, but I don't think it will with a new candidate. Handovers are always tricky for the Lib Dems. But I certainly keep on hearing what sounds like unionist ticket voting is going to happen to stop this happening. Not in every seat, but in some seats, I think in Grampian, in the Borders, possibly in the Highlands, although things are very personal in the Highlands. it's getting to a point where Labour people are saying, right, we've got to back the Lib Dems, and Lib Dems are saying, right, in places like Aberdeen South, we've got to vote for Ambert, etc. And that's the more congenial bits where things haven't got ahead, I think. But the other thing I'd say is that incumbency is a very two-edged sword. And the thing is, the Lib Dems got a number of heavy handing down, quite a large number, in what should be safe Liberal Democrat seats. And because we make such a bloody personality cult out of our MPs, it's very difficult to hand seats over. We've managed it, but even in good years, like 2001, we had a couple of failed handovers. It's a very tricky thing.
It's like the old Great Britain relay team at every single Olympics.
Yeah. And we basically build them up into little gods, and some of them tend to think they are. Like, you can always tell a bad Lib Dem MP, they last one term. They don't last. If they're bad, they don't last. Casting no aspersions. But, the ones who can't hack it, can't do the work, and all Lib Dem MPs who last more want to do a terrific amount of work. Don't get me wrong, most MPs do a terrific amount of work, but Lib Dems do twice as much. As I think it was Andy put it on the board. We always have to be campaigning. We never have downtime. We always have to be reminding the people that we're there because we haven't got that core vote.
You haven't got the backdrop of ultimately it's us or the other lot, because
that's right.
Tories have got.
And in some cases, like in Hallam, for instance, the party's had to change its campaigning strategy 360 degrees. Previously, we've been the ones to beat the evil Tories. And over the last few years, we've had to change that completely round to say, in Hallam, dear Tories, give us your vote to keep the wicked Labour out. At least in Yardley, we haven't got that problem. It's always been the evil Labour. So that's less of a problem. There are a few seats that have had to do a 360-degree turn, and Bristol West is one of them. And in some of the cases, Hallam look like they've managed it, and in Bristol West, I understand they haven't managed it.
No.
That's looking very precarious, isn't it?
And of course, and one of the very interesting other heartlands that might be very surprising on the election, and again, I think, Ian, your points here would be very valid, and Tom's yours as well, is actually the Southwest. What we've seen, and again, I think quite a lot of this is a tendency to do constituency voting that isn't actually based on names, but the Times and quite a lot of other papers were reporting very recently that there has been, just as we're looking at a general wipeout of the Unionist parties in Scotland, we're also looking at a wipeout of quite a lot of the Lib Dem strongholds in Cornwall and North Devon. Now, the word that I've heard on the ground is the fact that that's not strictly speaking true. A very good friend of mine works for Adrian Sanders, who's the MP for Torbay, which is sort of like English Riviera, where they filmed... Americans, if you're interested, this is where they filmed Fawlty Towers. But it doesn't seem like, by the sounds of it, my friend has pointed out that he hasn't burst into a kitchen and attacked a Spanish waiter yet, so therefore it has to be doing a little bit better than the polls are suggesting. And certainly Mr. Sanders...
I'm really trying to do a John Cleese Lib Dems joke, but it's just not forming.
I really wanted to have an SDP mug with me, but I don't actually have one. I just wanted to be drinking constantly from an SDP mug. Again, I don't know if you chaps would have anything to say about that.
I'm not saying anything.
Yes, Ian can't comment. I'm not sure the rest of us really know enough to do it.
Well, I mean, something I found striking was that a lot of the Lib Dem seats that even sometimes in 2010 had substantial majorities, and if you're just looking back at the 2010 map, which I have been sometimes, would imply that they were the safe seats. In fact, as Ian says, a lot of those Lib Dem seats, they are constantly campaigning to remind people they exist. And looking back at previous results, they've been close even in good years for the Lib Dems. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to go Tory now, but it means it's not really that predictable.
No.
What I would say.
And of course, the fact is, we will have surprise results on the night. I'm sure, like lots of people on the inside were probably thinking that Lembit-Opik would lose in Monmouthshire, Montgomeryshire rather, which of course was a massive shock to lots of people. But this was a maverick Lib Dem MP who wasn't suited to campaigning in quite small C conservative rural Wales. But
I've not actually heard that was the case with Lembit. I thought it was very much the scandal, as it were, was that it was so late in the campaign that it was realised. I thought he himself didn't really clock that he was in trouble until very late, and the whole thing crept. Because the media, I remember, were really shocked by it. They didn't really have anyone on saying, "Well, we did hear rumblings about Lembit-Opik." I mean, my memory could be failing me there.
I mean, one of the very interesting results which I heard might come out is that Maidstone and the Weald, which is currently run a Conservative seat, it was a very safe Conservative seat held by, probably most famously of all, Anne Widdecombe, the sort of like barn pot former Shadow Home Secretary. That's apparently very close between the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives. The incumbent Conservative MP, a woman called Helen Grant, is very unpopular there for a number of reasons, and so it could see that we do see that rarest of things on the day, which is Liberal Democrat gain. I'm not sure I quite buy that myself, but there will be the occasional event where an otherwise incredibly safe seat for one of the major parties, again, outside Scotland, magically sort of goes completely the other way, and we'll sort of, and because of the way that the results come in, we'll probably be talking about that for a lot more than it necessarily deserves.
I think the Maidstone situation has been overblown somewhat. The Ashcroft said that Helen Grant was 5 points behind without naming names. I believe in negative incumbency, and I believe Helen Grant is the sort of candidate who could have it, but I don't believe it's a 5-point negative incumbency. And looking at the way the vote shares are, according to Ashcroft, it would take Kipper votes to pull us over the line there, I think. And one thing I have noticed is that Kippers aren't very squeezable. Once you've decided to go UKIP, you go UKIP. But just to correct Jack slightly, the years of the blonde bomb site were actually an aberration. Maidstone has actually been competitive for Liberals since 1974. We put on a very good go in 1983 and nearly got it, and actually narrowed it down even further in 87, and then Widdecombe turned up, and she was an immensely popular MP. We all have opinions on her. She's an interesting character. If you ever have a chance to hear her speak, I recommend it, because she is genuinely interesting.
In the Chinese sense.
And quite clever as well.
Yes.
And
well, that's a University of Birmingham education for you.
Well, indeed. And it's it's a situation where Maidstone is one of the 3 seats where we could see the dreaded Lib Dem gain up on the night. But I actually don't really hold out hopes for any of them except Watford. I think Watford is a 3-way marginal. It's been fought extremely hard. It could have been a 4-way marginal. Hello, Andy. But the Greens have done one of their usual, what's a leaflet thing for 4.5 years, or have slipped behind. Well, everybody else has been going at hammer and tongs ever since 2010. We've picked a very, very good candidate in Watford, very popular, the elected mayor. Sorry, I have distaste for elected mayors. And I think that if there is going to be a seat that we win, it will be Watford. But Mace is a possibility, and there's another one that I'm not going to mention.
Not at all.
Serious.
So I think maybe what would be quite a good position for us to go on for the time being is if we just briefly say what the election has looked like in our constituencies. As more than a few people have noticed, this is... we never really do massively visible elections in this country at the best of times anyway. There was a very good article in The Guardian by a reporter from Die Zeit, the German sort of newspaper of record, although it formerly was the newspaper of record. People might take umbrage with that.
The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung will be heading over your way in 5 minutes.
Who pointed out, and it was actually very good, that the Guardian did their usual clickbaity thing of sort of it starting off with the headline was, "Why don't you talk about anything important in your country?" And actually, what it turned out was it was a very a very well written. I actually felt quite proud reading it, which may well have been the intention. But the chap just saying, well, we have posters everywhere with candidates' names and faces on it. We have a stall in the town centre and hand out leaflets and talk to people, but that's it. This concept of politicians going door to door, knocking on thousands of doors, talking to people, leafleting them, and getting information.
It's nicht möglich.
Yeah. It is rather strange. So we do have to take into account the fact that, yes, this is somewhat of an invisible election in the sense that billboards are sort of going out of their way in some respects.
They sort of are. The spend isn't there. I mean, just to cut it very slightly on, we're actually wearing a slightly different hat just because I know some people who work in advertising, as in just conventional advertising. That is sort of following the way the wind is blowing.
Yeah.
Spend is being made on funny YouTube videos that people will share on Facebook much more than and believe it or not, that you can't just mock that up in your bedroom. You actually need to pay a bunch of Americans £4 billion to do it. You can't, and that obviously would pay for a lot of billboards.
Of course it would. And although, of course, the Conservatives, given the fact they're the only people who actually have money to spend on this sort of thing at the moment, have been very good, I think, at trolling. I mean, I was up in Enfield North on Saturday, and there's a very, very good campaign happening in Ilford. I imagine by the sounds of it that that Labour may win there, but the Conservatives, that there happens to be a billboard on the wall just opposite from the Labour campaign headquarters that does have a very large Vote Conservative banner there. So I think I think that's probably less about actually winning people over and more about just sort of trying to get a little bit of psychological one-upmanship there.
Mm.
There's a beautiful bit of trolling in Tunbridge Wells at the moment. I don't know if any of you follow Andrew Kennedy, who's a Conservative agent and an old friend of mine. But there's two large and, as Andrew puts it, vulgar UKIP posters have appeared on a prominent street corner. And the neighbours opposite have put up two large purple boards which basically say "Vote UKIP." And on the kitty corner opposite, the neighbours have put up two large boards saying "Please don't," in purple, which is a very Tunbridge Wells thing.
Yes.
But yes, I know what Jack's saying. Like, obviously, Yardley has been marginal since the year dot. We came to prominence in 87, we tried for it in 92 and nearly got it. We fell back a little in 97, we pushed forward a bit in 2001, but were saved by thousands, literally thousands of people coming in from the unions. I'm not joking, there were over 2,000 Labour activists in Yardley in the last week of the campaign because they thought they'd lost. In 2005 we took it, we held it in 2010, a very muted campaign because, well, we were all in Hall Green or Solihull. I assure you there's been no crossing the boundaries this time. Basically, it has been an interesting campaign from the actual lack of Labour presence. There was a period, they have put out a very minimal amount of literature, but that's normal for them. The Labour Party believes firmly in Birmingham that 2 leaflets for the election will do. Despite that we've been schooling them it won't for 25, 30 years, they still believe that is the way to do it, because a large number of them, to be perfectly honest, are bone idle. I know other Labour parties in other parts of the country aren't, and they put out regular literature and they campaign fully, but I'm afraid that the experience of most of Birmingham is that Labour are bone idle. And we have put out since January 12 leaflets to every door, fuck knows how many target mailings, and we have achieved 25,000 voter contacts. That's some going it. If you actually knew how many people were working, you'd be surprised. Labour have put out, as far as we can tell, about 6 pieces of literature, plus several national mailings. They have done quite a lot of doorsteps. I wouldn't be surprised if their doorstep numbers aren't the same as ours. But since last Wednesday, we've been playing a game in Yardley. The game has been Spot the Labour Activist. We haven't seen any.
You say
that's
since
not
last
true.
Wednesday.
If I'm,
Yeah.
Oh.
yeah,
Well,
yeah,
Since
Tom, maybe
last,
we're beginning at the
since
same
last
point.
Wednesday, we haven't seen a thing.
Oh.
One thing that has struck me, I happen to live 1.5 miles from the edge of one constituency to another. Wantage, the constituency I'm in, is a safe Tory seat. I am just over the border of Oxford West and Abingdon, which is most certainly not a safe seat. Here in Wantage, I have seen maybe 1, maybe 2 posters. Over in Oxford West and Abingdon, I was driving into Oxford and back for a children's birthday party today. I must have seen 50 or 60 posters for both the Lib Dems and the Conservatives, and 1 Labour poster that looked very, very lonely. The difference in effort that's put in between margin on a safe seat has never been as underlined as it is here. I am literally 1,500 metres, 2,000 metres from the edge of such a seat, and it's incredible.
if I can come in here briefly, because I am going to have to leave in a couple of minutes, to get back to that German's article, it's, I think, because we do things very similarly to how he to how Jack describes how he describes it in there, and I think the campaign styles will obviously vary from, because you don't have straight up first past the post, so obviously there will be different styles because of that, but also because of local laws. For instance, I believe actual full-on door-to-door canvassing, like going to people's doors and asking them who they're likely to vote for, that's actually illegal in Sweden. We don't allow either private organizations or the government to attempt to do what I believe the law refers to as opinion registration, which is to say, like, asking people what their political views are, more specifically with regard to voting. So, like, we have to target voters based on demographics and based on the affluence of different neighborhoods, rather than going for several different messages depending on how the canvas or how the individual voter responded to canvassing, and that means we only get we really like, the way we do it is we only campaign in areas that are likely to support us but have low turnout, which I think is similar to how they do it in America. Stan will know about that. Yeah, and so obviously it's a lot less refined than campaigning would be in Britain, but it's also a bit more, I think, a bit more public and less personal. Because, like, most of the campaigning does not take place in people's homes. It takes place partly around shops and partly in public places. So instead of the parties reaching out to the individual voter, you get individual voters reaching out to the parties. And I don't know if this is really, like, I couldn't judge if this is more or less effective, but I do know that turnout in elections is generally much higher here. I think the lowest it dropped even in the late 90s was about 80%, and in
I
the
think-
70s and the 80s it was almost 90.
I think Sweden obviously has a very, very different political and civic culture to
Well, yeah,
to the UK.
I like that.
So I think,
That's
yeah.
definitely.
And as a result, your political system and your canvassing or lack of and campaigning has kind of been born out of that. But that's really interesting. I didn't actually know that there was anywhere in the world where canvassing is illegal. But once you actually mentioned it, it does sort of make sense.
Yes.
Political organisations being able to knock on people's doors and bother them. It strikes me as the kind of thing that certain countries, certain cultures would go, well, no, of course you can't do that.
Yes.
If I could just because I'm aware I've not been able to talk about no, it's all right. Sorry, just on Andy's point about leaflets and the difference in safe and marginal seats. You guys may have noticed on the forum a while ago I was saying that I've not really done a leafleting update because I simply haven't received anything. And one thing I wanted to ask was because the day after I made that post, everything came through my front door. It was comical. I came home and there were 5 leaflets. It was the whole shebang. You know which 5 parties it was. And I was wondering if there is actually a certain date at which these things normally, because a lot of them were direct mails. They were actually the mail shots that each one got.
The free posts.
The free post, sorry, yeah, the free post. So that was really interesting, and I guess it obviously made me aware, as Andy was saying, I've spent some time in Croydon Central, spent a lot of time in Croydon Central, not only to work but also to campaign for the evil socialists, or literally Quislings as they're now known in Scotland. But
Traitors.
Red Taurus.
Red Tories. Sorry, I forgot what we were this week. Himmler, I think it was last time. But the only thing I really have otherwise of note to pass on regarding my leaflets that I've had in Croydon South is that my Green candidate is called Peter Underwood, which is something I enjoy more than life itself. And I've spent the last week just constantly going around tapping tables and saying, I love the green belt like a shark loves blood, but everybody knows that climate change is but a means to an end.
I will point out one of my favourite leaflets that I have actually received. So again, just for context, so I'm in Old Southwark and Bermondsey and Old Southwark rather, which is is held by the second longest serving Liberal Democrat MP. This was, of course, one back in a particularly fractious by-election back in 1981. So this is...
And contrary to rumors, I was not there.
Is Ming the longest? Is Ming the longest?
No, Alan. So
Alan, right, gotcha. Of course. Sorry, I knew that.
Yeah. But so it's very much a tight marginal between Simon Hughes of the Liberal Democrats and Labour's Neil Coyle. I think it will be a Liberal Democrat hold now. But the Conservative candidate is this rather interesting chap called J.P. Floru, who I understand is an Estonian Conservative. Who was recently, who libertarian who writes for the Adam Smith
Is it a fictional political party?
Yeah, it looks like it's a fictitious party. This is the best bit. Well, I don't know if you can see this. So this is my favourite bar chart that I've seen for quite some time. It omits Labour. It has the Conservatives on 30% and the Liberal Democrats down here on 6%. This is how Bermondsey and Old Southwark voted in the London mayoral election in 2012. Now, there's a couple of things that you might find very strange about it. Number one is the fact that it's slightly slanted. So it looks like the Jubilee, and I rather like the fact that it's the same sort of like grey as the Jubilee line, so it looks like it's an Elizabeth Tower, which of course is concerning the subsidence there. So it's slightly slanted. It completely omits the Labour vote, and it doesn't mention the Liberal Democrats at all. All it says is Cameron or Miliband vote Conservative, Labour more tax, Liberal Democrat more tax, Green more tax, Conservatives tax cuts. Low tax equals more growth equals more jobs. Now, I'm sure that some of us will definitely agree with that, others mentioning no names probably won't think so either. But it is just one of the most astonishing leaflets I've ever seen in a marginal seat, because a lot more effort has come into this rather than the usual sort of fuck it, I'm obviously winning. But it basically looks like the Adam Smith Institute have delivered this, or the Taxpayers Alliance, rather than the Conservative Party. I love this. This is fantastic.
Has it convinced you? Are you Has it convinced you? Has it convinced you? You can vote for him.
Oh, well, I don't tell people how I'm going to vote on the day. Now, Tom,
Down as undecided.
Dr. Anderson, obviously you are an undecided. We know that.
Well, actually, I've already sent off my postal vote, so I'm not
It's the
anymore.
opposite of undecided. You are voted. You're unvoted.
He actually just put a question mark on all the although of course it does remind me of I think my favourite recent version, which I think happened in a council by-election in the Western Isles, where the returning officer judged that a ballot paper was valid after a postal vote came in that said. In order, I think, of the 5 candidates: wanker, 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 good guy, wanker. And that was deemed to be sufficiently able to show demonstrative intent of how to vote and was therefore ruled to be valid. Of course, the person who was a good guy was obviously the SNP candidate.
Right.
Yes, I've heard variations on that particular theme a number of times. I still believe that my triumph in Boothby Ward in York is still the best, where there were 3 candidates, one of which clearly had a very Jewish name, and somebody had put a swastika in the box next to them. It didn't affect the result, but I made a case, and the other 2 agents agreed that it was definitely a cross. It was a rather strange cross, but it was still a cross.
That's excellent.
And the returning officer looked at us all and went, "Oh, you all right?" You know. But one of the interesting things is Thomas mentioned the free post, which of course in safe seats is possibly the only thing that you will see from most parties. Now, as you can appreciate,
the Greens it is, and the Lib Dems in my seat, yeah.
We have 8 candidates, and as I have received 7 free posts, my husband has received 4 free posts, which actually means that Labour, the Lib Dems, and the Tories, and surprisingly, UKIP are taking things seriously enough to address the free posts. I was quite surprised to get the second Tory free post. I'll be killing Robert Alden after the election. But what we haven't had is, of course, a Green free post. And this is the problem. We've talked about UKIP and how that hasn't really amounted to much. But what we haven't talked about is Green Surge. Of course, there isn't one. There hasn't been one. In fact,
I think it's because what we said last time.
Well, the Greens are going to pick up about 3 or 4% of the vote, and most of that will come from the fact they're now standing in nearly 600 seats, as opposed to standing in 300 seats. The Greens, like we talk about how UKIP aren't going to do much. I had hoped at the start of the campaign UKIP would shrink down to 8 or 9%. I had hoped that we might creep up to 10 or 11. We may still make 10 on the day, I think. I don't know. We may still make 7 on the day. But the Greens are not going to do that. They're much talked about, much lauded. Natalie Bennett's car crashes notwithstanding, is a complete fiasco. And part of that is good for the Party. I know they claim they have lots of members now, etc. The Green Party, with the exception of a few seats like Brighton Pavilion, Norwich, Bristol, for a while in Lewisham, haven't got a fucking clue how to campaign. They really haven't. They do believe leaflets are evil thing, and that everybody will come round to the Green Way through some sort of, I don't know, immersion of 1 millionth part of green in water or something, But it's interesting. Here we are. The SDP candidate put out a free post. It must have cost him a fucking fortune. He's a single pensioner. The Respect candidate has put out a free post, which I've kept for later reference, which is actually incredibly bland and boring, and mainly consists of a picture of himself, which is why I kept it for reference. The minor parties have put out their free posts, and yet the Greens can't even be bothered with a free post. Like, what was the point of them standing?
Well, that does make sense. Oh, thank you.
Sorry, yeah. Can I? So, if we're going around giving an update on leaflets, as I implied in my introduction here, Doncaster
No,
was
I
a
thought you
safe
said you
Labour.
applied.
Yeah, it was a safe Labour constituency. In that, much like Ian describes Birmingham, Labour would send out maybe one leaflet if you were lucky, or a couple perhaps with the free post in a general election. And as you can see, I don't have a huge theatrical pile here. I've got quite a few leaflets here, but we've had something like 6 or 7 from Labour, including the free posts, and a similar number from UKIP. One from Tusk, rather nice magenta professional thing, quite unexpected from them. Nothing from the no, I'll tell a lie. One from the Tories. The Lib Dems are reduced to a paper candidate here, and we don't have a Green candidate, so I can't comment on that. But to a certain extent, I think Ian's right in that UKIP, as a default, don't know how to campaign. But in seats where a significant number of people and activists have defected to them, things are different. And in Doncaster, they've inherited virtually all our Lib Dems from 15 years ago, who definitely fall into the category of not actually Lib Dems, just some opposition to Labour, and it was a convenient banner, and there was the Iraq War and so forth. They have all...
I think there's always been 2 groups of Lib Dems that aren't really liberals. The first of the Iraq War ones, the second one's just community activists. People who've latched on to localism, community politics, and joined the Lib Dems because the Lib Dems are the community party.
Yeah, a combination of those two.
Yeah, and they also, a lot of them have gone, but actually a lot of them have stuck with us because we're still very community focused. But yeah, I can understand why they go to UKIP because they weren't really liberals, but they were localists and they had nothing in common with us.
Yes, exactly.
The only part of deluded than the Iraq War voters.
Yes. The only part of Doncaster that did appear to have a core Liberal vote was Bessaker, which may well go back to the Liberals this time. And last time was bizarrely won by Labour on a result that came out of Andy's timeline. I'm talking about the local elections here, to be clear. Labour won on about 25% of the vote in a 4-way result. But this time, the sheer level of UKIP presence, not only the leaflets but the posters all across the constituency, including in places where I've never seen any posters at all, and if there ever were, you would expect them to be Labour, is going to make it, I don't know, because I've kind of expected for a while that on the night, on the actual election day, okay, this isn't a local turnout, this isn't a European turnout, Labour is still going to get in with 20 points clear of UKIP. Now I'm not so sure. I don't think any of the Labour MPs are seriously threatened, but we might see sub 15% majorities, and that'll be interesting.
I mean, what if Ed Miliband lost his seat? I mean, other than the fact that David Miliband would no doubt, sort of like be having to pay quite a large sum of money to a witch doctor in Haiti. The sheer sort of, it is actually rather strange that we aren't really in a position where, by the sounds of it, any of the 3 leaders are in a realistic shot of losing their seat. But yes. And Andy, of course, we've already heard from you this tremendous sort of very obvious divergence between what are basically the same place, but one side has lots of lawn posts and stickers and leaflets and posters in windows, and your place has very few of them, which I do think is one of the rather strange things we do have about politics in this country, which is, despite the fact that we do work very hard to have constituencies that make sense, and when they don't make sense there is uproar, Mersey Banks, then that tends to sort of upset quite a lot of people. Tom, I don't know if you've seen like an obvious difference between, because obviously, you are rather like Andy in the situation where you're living in an incredibly safe seat, but up the road is an uber marginal. I was actually in Croydon earlier today to see.
Something in fact I don't believe I've ever passed on, just in case any of you were losing sleep over it. A question which I've never really answered, which was which seat is safer, Croydon North or Croydon South? Many of you may know already because you're who you are, but the answer is very much Croydon North. Croydon North is significantly safer for Labour than South is for the Conservatives. They're still incredibly safe, but and then I'm not even talking about predictions of the future. It's simply the majorities in both cases. What I was going to say is that
Croydon North is huge, of course, isn't it, population-wise?
Croydon North is huge. It's 120,000. It's getting on for one and a third or 1.5 times the size of what it's meant to be.
Which of course is, if anyone's not done Ian's sort of predictions thread yet, why the largest sort of numerical majority surely has to be East Ham. Not like Buckinghamshire or anything like that, but
That's clever, yeah. But yes, I just think the interesting thing is about campaign activity, and it really is. I mean, it is the same the world over with regards to candidates in safe seats. Particularly, the interesting thing is that Chris Philp, of course, is the man who very nearly beat Glenda Jackson last time, and is being rewarded this time with an exceptionally safe seat of being my MP for as long as I live here. And he's been campaigning a lot more in central than he has in south for obvious reasons. The interesting thing is I didn't quite anticipate the sheer level to which he would be campaigning in south. Because he's not really been present at all. He's done a few in the last couple of weeks. He's done a couple of like high streets and railway stations, that sort of vibe. But what I find really interesting is that when I mentioned that load of leaflets and literature I received, I still actually haven't had a single leaflet from the Conservatives. And this is their seat. I've received direct mails, but they're kind of like letters. They feel like the kind of letters you get because you're on some mailing list somewhere, not ones that go out to general constituencies. Now I don't know if that's usually the case, but it just struck me as almost hubristic, frankly, particularly as they do need to at least point out that it's not Richard Ottaway anymore. But anyway, that's my big change. The difference between central and south though is huge. There is a lot more. As you say, there's loads more posters, like you and Andy said, Jack. Loads more posters in Croydon Central. Just so much more activity. But yeah, not much more really to say. It's just pretty much as you'd expect.
Great, fantastic. So I think that's quite a lot of the stuff done there. We have been talking for golly, we're going up to an hour and 20 minutes actually. So I think maybe we should maybe make this the last topic of discussion. But one thing I would be rather interested in, and if we may talk about it, it's that most horrible of things. It's policy. I will have. So obviously we now have all the manifestos released. Some of them have got. Tell that up again, Andy. I didn't see that.
Yellow card.
Yellow card.
Talking about policy. We're meant to be talking about which party will work with which party after the election. Please.
Oh. Please, no.
I'm still holding out
for everybody.
One thing I am very annoyed about is certainly a change that I saw compared with 2010 is the fact that you don't actually be able to buy the manifestos anywhere. I mean, I rather like. Because I've got more money than sense and I'm depressingly single, I have no money to spend on anything other than myself, and I was rather tempted to, just like in 2010 when I got the mushroom cloud social realism monstrosity that we did. I thought I could maybe get into Waterstones and pick up a couple of the manifestos. I wasn't able to do that this time. As I said, the only reason I've got the Labour one at the moment is because I was I was campaigning up in somewhere and I just said, have we got a copy? And apparently they had like about 5 or 6 of them just so that we could, if anyone sort of hit us with a policy question, which never happens.
Every now and again.
My best moment was when I was canvassing in Bermondsey last week, one afternoon, and someone asked me about the Bakerloo line extension, and I basically spoke to them for about 20 minutes. And I think that's definitely another seat to Simon vote for Simon Hughes. Clearly, but I just it was like, this is an infrastructure question that I can talk about. Anyway, but we don't really we do that very much now. So, but I'm just very annoyed that we don't seem to be able to buy manifestos anymore.
No. Of course, on that same trip to Waterstones, I was actually with you on that trip, and I was able to buy a copy of Graham Shimon's A Kill in the Morning, which of course is a paperback book that originated on AH.com as an alternate history story. So congratulations again to Graham for that. He managed to get it published, and it's available in all good Waterstones.
Yes.
No other bookshops, just Waterstone.
Yes. Other bookshops are available.
Other bookshops are available.
Other bookshops are available. I really miss Autocars because it was named after my favourite Tintin book.
Yes. In the one in Doncaster, they used to have a huge mural, or murial, as my grandma would say, of the cover of King Ottokar's sceptre as a reference, which sadly is now gone. 'Cause it's a water
Your
stone.
grandma was Hilda Ogden.
I feel like we're now getting into true Politibrit thread territory. What's everyone having for dinner?
Yes.
I don't know. I'm waiting for the annoying guest to go.
I actually do have some mini chicken Kievs, so this could get very Politibrit. Yeah.
This is getting very meta.
Shall we go for predictions at this point?
Yeah, I think that's a good way to close off. We did it last time.
Who wants to go first?
Well, Andy, I think is our
I'll do it.
last in, first out. What would you like to go with? And then we'll all just copy what you've said.
Yes.
In which case, I'm going to give a range, and I'm copying out. I'm not giving it a specific number. I'm giving a range. 20 seats.
Right, John Curtis.
10 seats for the smaller ones. So, Conservatives, 275 to 295. Somewhere in that range. Labour, 255 to 275.
Caledonian Thistle 1. Montrose 2.
4, Forfar 5. The Lib Dems are the hardest one, 20 to 30. SNP, 44 to 55. Sorry.
Sorry, you mean 19 to 19?
In base 23, yes.
That's
And
accurate.
1 to 4. I wouldn't be too shocked if it was outside of those ranges. This is the most unpredictable election in my adult life, and I'm one of the older peoples here, and Tom's just suddenly gone very dark. Sorry.
It did look a little bit, Jeff the Killer then. I'm a bit worried.
But yeah, that's I think that the Tories will have a lead in votes and a lead in seats, and it's really up in the air as to just quite how much of an unworkable mess this is going to be. No one's going to be happy. It's going to be an unworkable mess. Next.
So, great and optimistic. Dr. Anderson?
Well, if I can slavishly copy what Andy's just said, no. What I have had a more of a gut feeling in the last few days that I think that although the polls average out to more or less equal, I think the Tories may pull ahead on polling day, and I can't really put my finger on why I think that. But to a certain extent, I see it as, ironically, given some of my views, a pan-European trend, really, that social democratic centre-left parties that should, in theory, have an open goal, as it were, are just failing to perform at the last minute. And I know if Max was still here, he could comment on that in Sweden, for example, but it's been a trend in many countries. And I can't claim to understand, to explain why that is, but
there's a very good lecture found that you should read by one David Miliband, in fact,
Yes.
called "Why the Left Isn't Winning Elections in Europe." Perhaps you've read it as part of this. It's quite good.
No, I haven't, but yes, thanks for letting me know about that. Yeah, so that's more of a gut feeling, but even though I think the SNP are going to somewhat underperform the polls, I still think they're going to be the biggest party in Scotland. I still think they're going to be first in votes, but I would put their numbers on 35, and Andy can tell us what that is in base, what base that needs to be to make it 19. But I would put their numbers on more like 35, which in theory would help Labour, but I just can't see Labour pulling ahead. And we've all been in a situation where we can't see something happening, and it happens anyway. But I don't know. So at the moment, I would put my finger on the Tories slightly ahead. No one anywhere near a majority. That's hardly a brave prediction right now. I would think the Lib Dems will be on about 27. That's a number I've said for a while. And I think the most likely outcome of the election is some attempt to resurrect the current coalition as possibly even as a minority that may well not last for very long. Possibly bringing in Northern Ireland as well, but not the SNP.
Great. Ian?
Well, I think it's very difficult. My head is telling me that we're going to have 1992 in the polling booths, and that the Conservatives will win the election in terms of the vote share. They may even increase their current miserable vote share by another % or two. However, I think that the marginals, from what I've seen, are looking a bit more favourable for Labour than you'd think. I'm certainly surprised. I went back to Stourbridge yesterday to see my aunt and uncle.
On the Perry People mover?
Indeed, on the Parry People mover, yes. I got the direct train to Stourbridge Junction and then took the horrible chiropractor's friend the mile to Stourbridge Town. I can't help feeling that Stourbridge shouldn't be this close. And it feels very close talking to people. I think Margot will overcome things, but I think she'll have a very small majority. Ditto, I work in Crewe and Nantwich, and I appreciate that I work in Crewe. That Crewe is definitely the Labour Party seat, and Nantwich is very much Waitrose City. But I can't help feeling that Crewe and Nantwich shouldn't go, although there is an element of by-election unwind there, but it will go Labour. I think the two parties will be roughly equal on around 275 seats, but Tories will have a vote advantage. I'm going to make no comment on the Liberal Democrats, apart from the fact I think you're all being very optimistic. I think that UKIP the SNP will probably get somewhere north of 40 seats, but somewhere south of 50. I think that's a tragedy. If they do get a wipeout, I wonder if they'll go full second Doyle. Certainly some of their supporters would want them to. Plaid will probably stay on their 3 seats. UKIP, I think, will get 2 or 3 seats, but then I can't help feeling that we're going to suddenly be shocked by somewhere we've never thought of. Somewhere probably in the north, where the Labour Party have sat back on their arses 50 years and not noticed anything. I don't know. No, it's not going to be Doncaster Central. All those areas are pre-warned by last year's local elections. It's going to be somewhere weird, possibly on the other side of Pennines, you know. But I just think there's going to be a UKIP surprise. And
I have my suspicions about Penistone and Stocksbridge. I'm sticking to that one. It's very unlikely, but if it is, I'll be vindicated.
I was thinking of somewhere more like Ashton-under-Lyne, which has always had a very strong vote for the BNP, even when they were doing badly.
Yes.
But all in all, yeah, God knows what's going to happen. And as I said, I'm going to wait for the exit poll. I may wait up to Sunderland South, by which time I'm going to be on my feet for 18 hours, and I'm going to go to bed. I wake up at 5:15 in the mornings anyway, and by that time I'll be able to come downstairs and quietly slash my wrists at the thought of Farron. And, you know, the 2 results I'd most like is for, and they're not going to, neither may happen. One would be for Farron to lose, and the other one would be for Majid Nawaz to win Hampstead.
Oh, yeah, well, we don't
I think he'd be an absolutely brilliant MP.
I've met him once, and you know, if I was in Hampstead and Kilburn, I would be very tempted. He is superb, and I get the feeling that hopefully he will have a seat at some point in the future.
Who is this? I missed the name.
Majid Nawaz.
Majid Nawaz.
Where's he staying?
Hampstead and Kilburn.
Glenda Jackson, of course, who was stepping down, but yeah. And Tom.
Well, thank you, Jack. Yeah, I think William Hague will form a majority government with just six. Sorry, not sure what came over me. What I
appreciate it.
Good, because you are to blame. No pun intended.
Literally.
Obviously I'm in a difficult position when it comes, or an interesting position when it comes to predictions, with one particular figure. What I will say before I make my formal figures-based prediction is that
and based on people talking to us as they left the polling station. This is not a prediction. This is what they're voted like. Remember.
this is in very only a bit of fun, but I have seen. Well, no, I wouldn't put myself into the same category as Ian when it comes to access to data. But I've got I have some ears to some grounds, and while my SMP prediction I acknowledge, which I maintain, of 19 seats, while I acknowledge that it is optimistic, but I believe that it is one that is worth holding out hope for. I think, yeah, if perhaps you can read between the lines, I think Labour are going to do better than the polls are currently suggesting for them in Scotland. If I can't really give the figures that I would expect, but they would be a range to use Andy's methods. They would be a range, but I think Labour are not actually and it's not in the kind of no shit Sherlock sense. I think there is actually a very real chance that Labour will do significantly better than they're expected to do based on the polling the national level polling that we see, and indeed the Ashcroft marginals. However, I do.
In the impossible event of it not being 19.
Yes.
In an alternate history where that was possible.
Of course, yeah. I couldn't actually say, to be honest. I couldn't actually say in terms of where do I think? Okay, where do I think based on that and also other gut feelings. If the SNP were to do significantly better than 19, which I don't think they will, I guess I could see them getting to the high 20s. And maybe coming a bit short of that, but that would be a very irregular result because, as we all know. So my actual prediction, which I've just run the numbers on, and it just about makes sense, would be that this obviously doesn't add up to 650 because Northern Ireland and all that. But what I'm feeling at the moment is 25 Liberal Democrats. Start with them. That's kind of where I've been for them for a while. I did think, interestingly enough, they were on 19 for a while, but I now have a different base prediction for that figure. I think the SNP will get 19. I think the Labour Party will get about 290, and I think the Conservatives will get about 270, and I think then we get into Northern Ireland and Litlands, but in terms of Litlands, I think UKIP are going to get 2. I think it'll be 2, and it'll be Carswell, and whether it's Farage or somebody wacky somewhere, I feel it's for some reason my gut says it's going to be either or. Possibly Thurrock, but actually Thurrock might not. Thurrock's kind of not as Ian put it. Thurrock's not really a wacky choice. No. It's kind of where everyone expects it. So I think.
At the moment, 25 seats for Plaid, the Greens, and others.
That would be correct, because of course there's 10. I've put sort of 10 for the DUP.
With 18 taking out.
Oh yeah. Oh blimey. Okay.
25 left after that.
Then clearly Natalie Bennett is going to lead a party of 26 seats. But no, that's yeah. I'm not good at maths, but those are sort of the top line Labour Tory figures. Labour 290. Depending, of course, if the 19 does happen, then Labour could somehow end up near 300. Yeah. But, we'll see.
Well, I mean, personally, I disagree with all.
Should resurrect a majority of one.
Yeah. I mean, personally, I disagree with all of you. I mean, I think judging by it and based on past experience, the Progressive Conservatives will continue to be quite some way in the front in the Alberta general election. Oh, no, sorry,
call back.
I'm reading the wrong page. I'm reading the wrong page. I would point out, I've just sort of seen on Twitter that The Independent has come out in support of, quote, a coalition that is a little bit less conservative and a little bit more liberal, which is them doing their usual sort of namby-pamby.
Fucking what?
I can't, it's sort of like putting a fucking whale on it with the headline "Famine?" ?
That's actually worse than what. No. Fucking question mark.
Yeah, but who reads indescribably boring?
Yeah.
The Independent has endorsed democracy. Just a picture of Charles James Fox crying.
Yeah. If you've got a cat, be very careful if you need to line the litter train, because you might actually get some independence all over your cat shit. But the thing that I think we really have to worry about here, I don't know, frankly. I mean, my gut instinct is the fact that the Conservatives will be slightly ahead will be maybe quite a bit ahead on votes, but probably only about 10 seats ahead of Labour. As I said, I do think we are actually winning the ground game quite well in quite a lot of the key marginals. So it could be quite easily. You have a look at the marginals we need to gain. I think we're ahead in places like Croydon Central. I think we're ahead in places like Norwich North. I think we're ahead in. Oh, basically, if I've canvassed there, I think we're going to win. But I'm going to say that one. I do think that the Conservatives are probably going to be about 10 seats ahead. And again, so sort of like, I'm thinking maybe 280, 270, one way or the other. I think the Liberal Democrats, again, it could be 35 on a good day, it could be 20 on a poor day. I think a lot of it, I think far too much attention with regard to the Liberal Democrats has been placed on the Labour Lib Dem marginals, not on the Liberal Democrat Conservative marginals. Yes. Frankly, if the Conservatives gain places like Torbay or North Cornwall, we're looking at quite a bad result for the Lib Dems. If the Lib Dems hold places like that, Yeovil is another one exactly. Eastleigh, I doubt.
Haven, Bath.
Westmoreland and Lonsdale, but not that last one, obviously. For your sake, Ian, I hope that's the case.
As well.
And again, I think I don't know what's going to happen with Clyde. They could get. We're talking about such a tiny number of seats that even with such a massively hung parliament, it's not going to make a massive deal. Clyde could get 2. They could get 4. My gut instinct is that, to be honest, if Labour have a good result in North Wales, they may gain Athen, but I don't really see it, and I don't really see the Clyde gaining Anglesey either, Niamh Mon either. So my gut instinct really is sort of like 290 Conservative, 280 Labour, shall we just say 28 for the Liberal Democrats. I'm erring a little bit on the side of negativity with Scotland. I think we're looking at least 40 for the SNP. And sorry, I meant 19 obviously. Again, UKIP, I think 4. It could be 4. If we exclude Clacton, that Clacton is the only safe seat, and of course it's not a UKIP seat; it's a Douglas Carswell seat. And
Independent Reform Conservative Douglas Carswell.
Yeah, and I would be amazed if the Greens gained Brighton. I don't think they're going to lose Brighton Pavilion either, but there we go. And we're like an alliance white power in Northern Ireland. Sadly.
And well, there we go. We may have to leave it there then, sadly.
Golly, yes, we're going for about
a good set of predictions.
5 minutes. It's been a good while.
I think the most interesting thing is going to be the reaction of the Labour Party if they do get something like 280, 290, to why they lost. And the answer will be Scotland. And I don't think, to be absolutely honest, there's anything they could have done about it. I really don't.
I'm not sure. No, there's no. The SNP are obviously very keen to for various reasons to point out that there are things Labour could have done, but no. Not as in. Obviously there are, but you need a time machine to go back many years.
The writing was on the wall in 2007, if you ask me. Or, if we have to put a point within that parliament, because that was not an insurmountable position, the writing was on the wall when Wendy Alexander offered to call the SNP's bluff on a referendum.
Indeed, I remember that.
In that parliament, and Gordon Brown said no. If we have if future Ed T comes in, that will be it. The collapse of the Scottish Labour hegemony in Scotland became inevitable.
I think the only thing I would add to what Ian said is just the question of, we've agreed effectively that all the parties are going to lose in some way. It'll just be some more than others. But I think if Labour do get to 280, 290, particularly if they have made big losses to the SNP, the numbers that they indicate there will be that Labour probably won't see themselves as having lost. Because if Labour are on 280, 290, I'm not sure that the Tories are going to be on higher than that. But
and of course,
the problem is that you end up in a situation where if the SNP become the new IPP, is that you
parliamentary.
Yes, you end up with a situation where the SNP are going to permanently get something like 40-odd seats in Scotland until the Unionist parties learn to actually play a Unionist coupon. And that will be very hard for them to do. Very, very hard. Even harder than it was in Ireland, where eventually for the handful of Dublin and border seats, the Unionist coupon was arranged, in the same way that the anti-DKP coupon was arranged in East Prussia, so that Königsberg would always elect Liberals and Danzig would always elect, I can't remember, I think it was DRPs, to make sure the DKP didn't win every seat east of the Elbe. And you end up that sort of situation. It's unhealthy politics.
Yes.
But the situation is...
You're not defined about anything other than your allegiance to the nation.
Effectively, if this happens, and there is one election to turn it round, and I really think that the key thing we'll be debating next year is Gordon Brown going to show his mettle and go for Holyrood and try and win Scotland back for Labour? Because I believe he's the only person who can do it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Either that or zombie Donald Dewar, but there we go. Right.
Well, obviously zombie Donald Dewar.
Well, thank you very much to all of you for taking your time out on a bank holiday Monday, no less. I mean, I'm sure we are in the home straight now, of course. I know that we're all going to be up in one shape or form on Thursday night, Friday morning. I may well be at Tom's house in Croydon and maybe even at Croydon Central Camp, which will be very interesting. I've never been before. But yes, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. It's in the marginals now. Good night, everyone.
Good night. It's good night for me.
We begin bombing in 5.